A sharp, wet crack shattered the street's quiet. Bone snapped. A boy's scream, high, piercing, almost inhuman, ripped through the afternoon air like a warning siren, freezing every window, every open doorway. Ion hit the pavement hard. His body curled instinctively around his shattered right arm, bent at an unnatural angle. His face twisted in pain, but after that first scream, there were no tears, no cries, just clenched teeth and a body shaking from agony. Above him, the man stood calm, tall, solid, breathing slow, steady, like he'd just dropped a grocery bag, not broken a kid's arm. "This is what happens when you say no," the thug growled, loud enough for the whole block to hear. He swept his gaze across the stunned crowd, shopkeepers frozen mid-motion, teenagers clutching phones too scared to film, a mother holding her daughter tight behind a fruit stall. Anyone else feeling brave today? Not a soul moved. He adjusted the loose black belt knotted around his streetwear-styled gi, more urban armor than martial uniform. The wind caught the hem as he stepped back, revealing a twisted grin etched into his face like it had been there forever. Not triumph, just routine. He'd done this before, and he'd do it again. Ion was 17, skinny, hands raw from long days lifting crates and mopping aisles in the corner store his parents once owned. They were gone now. The store, and the stand he made in it, was all he had left. He'd refused the protection fees. No fear, no begging. Just a firm, steady. But no, that's all it took to get his arm shattered. Across the street, a man sat unmoving beside a plastic cup and an untouched drink, hunched at a worn-out cafe table outside an old tea shack. He hadn't flinched since the beating began. But now, he looked up. Faded jacket, cap low over his eyes, hands resting loose on his thighs. Nobody recognized him. Not yet. His name was Chuck Norris, and his attention wasn't on the thug. It was on the boy. It was on the boy. Ion tried to move, couldn't. His cheek pressed against the cold concrete, eyes clamped shut. The thug stepped closer, raised a boot, and drove it into the boy's ribs. A low thud, then a sharper collective gasp. That's when Chuck stood. No flair, no speeches, just quiet motion. He pushed his chair back, reached into his coat to leave a few bills on the table, and started walking. One step at a time, his boots tapped softly on the cracked pavement. No one noticed at first. Everyone's eyes were still locked on Ion, a few phones still recording, though most had lowered, fear overtaking curiosity. Then the energy shifted. The thug looked up. His brow creased. "You want some too, Grandpa?" he barked, spreading his arms wide like an invitation. Chuck didn't answer. He kept walking. A woman gasped. A shopkeeper inched backward. One of the teens lowered his phone. Something in Chuck's posture felt different, controlled, lethal. Not someone chasing trouble. Someone who'd already survived it. He stopped beside Ion. Still didn't look at the thug. Instead, he crouched, one knee down, voice low. "You're still breathing," Chuck said. "Good. You stood your ground." Ion's eyes fluttered open, glazed but aware. He nodded. Chuck stood again, and that's when the shift became impossible to ignore. He unzipped his jacket, let it fall to the ground. The breeze caught the edge of his shirt, revealing the pale outlines of old scars etched across his arms. The thug scoffed. "Oh what? Dropping your coat makes you tough?" Still, Chuck didn't respond, but his eyes met the thug's now. Cold, clear, unflinching. The kind of stare that made the street go silent. That made hearts stop. That said, you don't know what you've just started. Eyes, before we go further, drop a comment and tell us, where are you watching from? And hey, if this story has you hooked already, smash that like, hit subscribe, and share it with a friend who loves a good high-stakes showdown. Someone had arrived. Not to take control, not to raise their voice, just to stand, just to hold the line. And for the first time since the man known only as the Black Belt had started terrorizing this street, someone told him no, without uttering a single word. No one used his real name anymore. The Black Belt was all anyone needed to know, and it said enough. He moved through this block like he owned it, not because he claimed it, but because no one ever dared claim it back. He wore his sleeveless black Marshall jacket like a second skin, frayed at the edges, faded in places, but still worn like it was sacred. And that belt, jet black, scarred with sweat and time, Always loose, casual, like it didn't need to prove anything. Because to him, it didn't. Once upon a time, he had been something. Dojo prodigy, regional medalist, future champion. But respect came too slow. Fear came faster, so he pivoted. He sold his skills to street crews, taught punks how to throw punches, made his name by collecting dues and breaking anyone who wouldn't play along. His fist did the talking. His reputation left bruises. Week like clockwork, he walked the same route. Shops, payday, vendors nodded, heads stayed low, until Ion, a boy who believed in honor, in legacy, in standing for something. And because Ion had looked him in the eye and said no, the black belt didn't just demand money. He made a lesson of him, publicly, because fear isn't whispered, it's performed. He broke the boy's arm like dry wood, fast, loud, just messy enough to leave a scar in the minds of every onlooker. It worked. No one moved, except one man. The thug noticed him now, standing beside the boy. Older, slower looking, jacket at his feet, something quiet in his bones. You really want this, old man, the thug taunted. You think this is your moment? The man said nothing, didn't blink. He just stared, calm, unreadable, like he was measuring a storm. Let me guess, the thug sneered. You saw some viral clip online, some geezer knocking out a punk, and now you think you're the sequel? Still no reply. The black belt cracked his neck, popped his knuckles. Fine by me. I could use a warm-up. He stepped forward, then hesitated. Not fear, but something off. The old man's stance wasn't civilian, too rooted, too still, not preparing, prepared. For the first time in years, the black belt felt it, a crack, a shift, the certainty slipping. Chuck didn't move. He stood the way cliffs stand, the way statues hold their place through storms, arms at his sides. Fingers loosely curled, breathing even. The wind tugged his shirt. A vendor's tarp flapped behind him, and the black belt suddenly wasn't sure if he was facing a man or something older, something heavier. The crowd sensed it too. Phones lowered, whispers passed. Oh, do you see how he's standing? The thug tried to mask it, smirked, spoke loud. You know, I was just going to leave the boy to limp back to his dusty little store. Let him learn his place. But now, he took a step forward. And now I got to teach 2 lessons. Still, Chuck said nothing. Instead, he calmly bent down, lifted his jacket, and dusted it off with a single practiced motion. No rush, no drama. He draped it gently across the hood of a parked scooter, turned back, and stood squared, feet planted, weight balanced. No bravado, just precision. Like someone who didn't need to prove anything. The black belt's grin flickered. From a window above, someone whispered, Another voice, quiet, responded in no way. He wouldn't be here, but no one believed it. Not anymore believed it. Not anymore, because the silence surrounding him didn't feel awkward. It felt intentional, like a courtroom just before a sentence is read. The thug bounced on his toes, trying to reclaim the rhythm. We're just another wannabe hero, he muttered, more to himself than Chuck now. These streets are mine. Chuck didn't speak, but the air got heavier. A pressure. Like something coiling just beneath the surface. The black belt rolled his shoulders, raised his fists. Oh, fine, he growled. Well, let's finish this. And Chuck, still unmoving, said more in his stillness than words ever could. Because there's a kind of silence that roars, and Chuck Norris had just wrapped the whole block in it. The first punch came fast. A jab, quick, clean, aim for the face. It missed. Chuck moved less than an inch. A simple head tilt. The fist cut through empty air. He didn't blink. The thug gritted his teeth. Through another. Then a third. A cross aimed high. Chuck pivoted. Subtle. Smooth. Strike missed again by a breath. And Chuck's boots? Still on the ground. The thug was retreating, but not by choice. He backed up half a step, blinking. None of his strikes had landed. Not because Chuck was fast. Because Chuck was precise. Every movement was measured, small, contained, intentional, no wasted energy, no wasted breath. You dodging forever? The black belt snapped, circling. Or are you gonna hit back like a man? Chuck didn't flinch, didn't speak. Just lifted one brow faintly, like he was waiting for the man to catch up. The crowd had grown now. From windows, from doorways, from shadows. No one cheered, no one heckled. They just watched. The same silence that wrapped Chuck like armor wrapped them too. The black belt lunged, a low kick aimed at Chuck's thigh. It landed. Chuck didn't move. The thug grinned, feeling the thud through his shin. That grin lasted half a second. Chuck shifted. A subtle pivot, the energy of the kick redirected through his body instead of resisted. He stepped forward, lifted a hand, not to strike, but to catch. Another jab came. Chuck parried it, soft and surgical, forearm sliding across the thug's punch, guiding it harmlessly past. Then a light tap to the shoulder, like a teacher marking an opening. A suggestion, not a threat. The thug recoiled. "You think this is a joke?" he barked. Still no answer. Chuck adjusted his stance. Hands loose, shoulders low, nothing flashy. No form you'd find in a dojo. Not style. Structure. The black belt snarled and spun. A back fist, brutal fast, meant to break something. Chuck ducked. Not dramatically, just enough. The fist sliced over his head. Chuck stood up smoothly, his eyes now leveled, fixed on the thug's ribs, wide open. He didn't hit, just looked. And in that pause, something rippled. Not in Chuck and everyone else. A teen in the crowd whispered, "He's not fighting to win, he's fighting to show him how wrong he is." The thug growled, came at him again. 2 punches. A knee, a kick. Chuck blocked each. Efficient. Clinical. Defense stripped of ego. Still no counterattack. And that hurt more than any punch could have. It was humiliation by restraint. "You scared to hit back?" The thug spat. "Afraid of what happens when you fail," Chuck spoke at last. Just 4 words. Steady, calm, certain. "I don't miss twice." The thug froze. Confidence, once loud, stumbled over its own volume. Then Chuck moved. 1 step. 1 twist, 1 elbow. Close range. It landed dead center. The thug staggered. 2 full steps back. The air didn't erupt, it held its breath. Chuck didn't follow, just reset, feet aligned. Posture clean, no celebration, no smile, just waiting. The message wasn't just to him, it was to everyone. This wasn't a fight, this was a correction. And Chuck Norris had just started grading the test. The black belt gasped for air, his lungs burned, not from exertion but disbelief. All this from one man. 1 elbow, 1 silence. He hadn't expected this, not from someone who'd barely spoken, not from someone who hadn't even tried to finish him. And yet, here he was, backpedaling. Chuck didn't advance, didn't press. He just watched. And that shook the thug more than the hit, because loud fighters are easy. They bark, they strut, they need to be seen. But Chuck needed nothing. The thug spat on the ground. "A lucky shot," he muttered, to no one but himself. "You won't get another." Then he launched. Left jab, right cross, hook, low sweep, high hook, flawless form, decades of training wired into motion. And finally, 1 strike landed, across to Chuck's cheek. His head snapped sideways, red blooming at the corner of his mouth. Gasps, the crowd flinched. Chuck staggered, 2 steps, physics doing its job. The thug grinned, breath ragged. "Yeah," he growled. "A bleed." Chuck wiped the blood from his lip, eyes locked, unblinking. The thug didn't hesitate. A front kick slammed into Chuck's ribs. Chuck hit a stack of plastic crates. 1 toppled, crashed to the ground. The crowd rippled. Something shifted. The silence began to tilt, from reverence to dread. The thug felt it, fed on it. He came again. Downward hammer fist. Chuck blocked, but his ribs were open. The knee that followed hit like a sledgehammer. Chuck's jaw clenched. He bent but didn't fall. "We're not built for this," the thug sneered. "You came here for a moment. I live here." Chuck said nothing, but something in his shoulders changed. Something subtle, coiled. The black belt lunged again, spinning back fist. It connected, barely. Caught Chuck's jaw. He stumbled into a lamppost, hand catching the cold metal for balance. Blood trickled from both sides of his mouth now. His breath came heavy. But still, he stood. The thug unleashed everything. Chest jab. High kick. Low sweep. This time the sweep clipped Chuck's ankle. He dropped. 1 knee on the ground. The crowd stirred. Phones shook. A woman whispered, "He's going down." The thug saw it. Smelled it. He charged. Fist cocked for the knockout blow. Chuck looked up, not in fear, in calculation. He let the punch fly, then leaned just enough. And as it passed, he rose, and in that same motion drove a tight, compact fist, driven straight into the thug's ribs, just under the floating rib. The sound wasn't loud, but the reaction was. The thug gasped, staggered back, eyes wide. It wasn't just pain, it was realization. He'd opened the door. Chuck had walked through it. And now Chuck didn't wait. He stepped in, closer than comfort allowed. Too close for wide swings. Elbow, shoulder, palm, sternum, pivot. Elbow again. Chin. The rhythm broke. The thug stumbled. Chuck caught the collar of his jacket. Slam. Steel post. The thug roared, swinging wild. Chuck ducked, twisted, redirected, flung him sideways into a stack of milk crates. Plastic exploded. The thug hit the pavement, a heap of limbs. The crowd didn't cheer. They inhaled. Sharp, collective, stunned. Chuck adjusted his footing. The thug scrambled up, dirt on his face, sweat painting streaks across his temple. He looked around, panicked. Found a loose pipe among the debris. Swung. Chuck ducked under the arc, stepped inside. Knee, stomach. The thug doubled over. Chuck caught the pipe mid-movement, twisted it from his hands like he was taking a toy from a toddler. Didn't even look as he tossed it away. The thug kept coming. A jab, a kick, a desperate elbow. Blocked. All of it. Chuck wasn't absorbing now. He was dissecting. His strikes came sharp, clinical. One to the bicep, one to the thigh, one to the collarbone. They didn't just hurt. They undid him. The thug backed up. 2 steps. 3. His face twisted, not in rage, in uncertainty. Chuck followed. Measured. Unhurried. The fight had shifted. The crowd felt it. They knew. The thug was losing more than ground. He was losing the lie he'd believed. His stance faltered. His black belt hung lower now, tilted loose as if it no longer wanted to claim him. Chuck stood in front of him, unbothered, step by step, silent. No anger, no gloating, just presence. What? Oh, what are you? The thug rasped, spitting blood onto the pavement. Some kind of ghost? Chuck didn't reply. He didn't need to. The street answered for him, not in words, but in silence that had turned from passive to aligned. The people had chosen. They hadn't chosen fear. The thug glanced around. The crowd had grown. Still no sirens. Still no shouting. Just eyes. All of them on him, watching him fall apart. He snapped, lashed out with a roar. A tight front kick aimed at Chuck's midsection. Chuck caught it, midair, with one arm. The thug's eyes went wide. Too late. Chuck held the leg for a beat, just long enough for everyone to understand. Then he yanked it up, swept the other leg out. Thud. The man slammed to the concrete. Sound echoed off the storefronts. Chuck didn't follow, didn't finish. He stepped back, gave him space, worse than a strike. It was dismissal. The thug rolled over, coughing, wheezing, forced himself up elbow then knees, blood mixed with dirt at the corners of his mouth. But he stood. This time, everything was different. His stance was sloppy. Hands shook. Chuck waited. The thug came again, wild now. No technique, just panic. Swing. Miss. Chuck punished the opening. Stiff strike to the ribs. The thug bent. Chuck followed. Short elbow. Neck. Controlled. Precise, not crippling. Just enough. The man crumpled against a trash bin, clinging to what balance he had left. Moi, fighters, he gasped. I fought in rings. Dojos, you're no one. Chuck's voice came low, calm. Final. Oh, then you already know what happens when your form breaks down. The thug screamed, grabbed a broom leaning nearby, swung like a bat. Chuck didn't move. Waited. The swing came. Chuck sidestepped, caught the handle, twisted. The broom flew from his hands, clattered down the alley. Chuck didn't watch it fall. The thug dropped, one knee on the ground. Chuck approached, step by step, silent, unshaken. His shadow fell over the man, and for the first time the thug's eyes filled with real fear. He tried to rise. Legs trembling, he swung, weak, desperate, empty. Chuck let it graze his shoulder, then replied, one elbow, crack. The thug's head snapped sideways. His legs gave out. He dropped to both knees. Chuck stood over him, not angry, not proud, just present, like justice, made flesh. The man rolled onto his side, coughing, ribs clutched tight, face bloodied. Chuck didn't strike again. He spoke just once, never had to shout. Then he turned. Behind him, the entire street had stilled. No cheers, just understanding. The tyrant had fallen, and the man who dropped him had barely raised his voice. The thug lay half-crouched, gasping, blood smeared across his face, jacket belt. His black belt had come untied, dragging behind him, like a forgotten leash. He no longer looked like a fighter, just a man who'd tried to outrun the truth, and failed. Oh, Chuck stood nearby. Silent, still, He didn't need to advance, didn't need to pose. He was now the center of the scene. The gravity had shifted. The crowd had shifted. Shopkeepers stepped out from behind glass. A delivery driver killed his engine. Teenagers lowered their phones, watching now with their own eyes. No filters, no screens, just witnesses. They weren't watching a fight anymore. They were watching a reckoning. He didn't lunge this time. He ran not away, but forward toward Chuck. Wild, reckless, primal. Chuck waited. The man swung a heavy overhand meant to end it. Chuck slipped it with ease. The man followed with a knee, then a desperate elbow. Chuck blocked both, redirecting the force, stepping through the chaos like he was dancing with memory. A pipe clattered in the alley behind them. The thug saw it. He stumbled toward it, grabbed it. He turned, pipe raised, screaming now. Not with rage, but something closer to panic. Chuck didn't back away. He stepped in. The pipe came down. Chuck caught the man's wrist mid-swing and twisted. A pop, not loud, but clear. The thug cried out and dropped the pipe, clutching his wrist, falling to one knee. Chuck kicked the pipe away, clean across the street. It clanged against a curb and spun to a stop under a bench. Still, Chuck didn't strike. Instead, he looked around, at the people, at the silence. A woman whispered, "He's showing him restraint." The thug staggered upright again, refused to fall. Trembling now, his balance gone, his technique in tatters. "You think this proves anything?" He barked through gritted teeth. "You're just one guy." Chuck tilted his head slightly. One was enough. The thug looked around, expecting anyone to back him up, but the crowd didn't move. They weren't with him anymore. He wasn't feared. He was alone. And in that moment, something inside him cracked. Not bone, not tendon, pride. It drained from him like the blood from his nose. He lunged again, sloppy, final. Chuck pivoted, redirected the weight, let the man stumble past. He didn't strike. Not yet. He watched the thug trip slightly, try to spin back, fists raised like old habits still mattered. Chuck stepped forward again. This time his posture shifted. His right foot slid slightly behind him. Hips angled. Weight transferred. In the crowd, someone whispered, "He's setting up a roundhouse." The street held its breath. Chuck's right foot slid half a step outward. His body coiled. His balance was flawless. Shoulders loose, eyes locked. Every part of him spoke the language of discipline. This wasn't performance. It wasn't revenge. It was punctuation. The thug turned to face him, swaying, blinking, barely upright. Blood streaked from one eye. His mouth opened, but no sound came. And then it happened. In one fluid motion, Chuck pivoted. His left foot anchored. His hips rotated with surgical precision. The torque shot up his spine, through his shoulders, and his right leg snapped out like a whip. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was perfect. A roundhouse kick that cut through the air like a blade. It struck the thug clean in the chest, just beneath the collarbone. The impact echoed down the street like a thunderclap trapped in a canyon. The thug's body lifted off the ground, feet leaving the pavement for a fraction of a second. Then he flew backward, arms flailing, breath gone, eyes wide. He slammed into a steel roll-down gate with a metallic clang so sharp it turned heads down the block. The sound rang like a final bell. Then silence. Real silence. The kind that arrives when something ends. The thug collapsed in a heap, his body crumpling sideways, one leg twitching once, then still. His arms were spread, mouth slightly open, chest rising and falling in broken, shallow gasps. He wasn't unconscious, but something in him had shut off. The fight, the defiance, the myth, gone. Chuck stood still, his right leg retracting smoothly back into neutral stance. No smile, no roar of victory, just a man returning to stillness. The crowd didn't cheer. They couldn't. They were frozen because they had just seen something few people ever do, the end of fear. Near a fruit stall, a boy dropped his phone, not from clumsiness. He forgot he was holding it. A vendor pressed his palm to his chest. An old man took off his hat, holding it to his heart as if mourning the arrogance that had just been buried. Chuck stepped forward. The thug stirred, tried to lift his head, and failed. Chuck stopped beside him, looked down, not with hate, not with disgust, with clarity. He crouched slowly, his voice barely carrying to the sidewalk. "You ruled by fear, but fear forgets. Respect remembers." He stood again, turned, walked back toward the place where Ion had fallen. The boy was still sitting against the wall, clutching his arm in its makeshift sling, eyes wide, locked on the scene he had just witnessed. The crowd parted silently as Chuck moved through them, like the tide moving for the moon. Chuck knelt beside Ion, steady and calm. "You held your ground," he said. "That's the part that matters." Ion nodded slowly, lips trembling. "I thought I was alone." Chuck looked around, dozens of faces, quiet, watching, but no longer afraid. "Not anymore," he said, helping Ion to his feet, the weight of the boy's broken arm supported gently by the man who had just undone years of fear in a matter of minutes. The boy said nothing. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes, confused, overwhelmed, grateful, was enough. Chuck led him toward the edge of the street, weaving through the silent crowd. People stepped aside, not out of fear, but respect. A rickshaw driver who'd been watching the whole time jumped out before Chuck could speak. "I'll take him," the driver said, nodding. "A nearest clinic. Fast." Chuck helped Ion into the back seat, making sure he was settled, his arm secure. "We're going to be okay," Chuck said, voice calm, grounding. "You stay steady. You already did the hard part." Ion tried to speak, but emotion caught in his throat. He swallowed, then whispered, "Thank you." Chuck nodded once, closed the door. The rickshaw peeled away, leaving behind the final echo of pain. Chuck turned back. Now the street faced him, not one by one, but as a whole. Shopkeepers, mechanics, children, mothers. No one spoke, but everything had changed. A thin store owner stepped forward. "We've been waiting for someone like you," he said, removing his cap. Chuck didn't respond. An elderly woman, leaning on a cane, touched her hand to her chest. "You didn't just fight for that boy," she said. "You fought for all of us." Still, Chuck said nothing, not because he didn't care, but because words would cheapen it. He walked past them slowly, eyes scanning the faces, not for praise, but for certainty. He needed to know it had sunk in. It had. Fear was no longer the currency here. It had been replaced by memory, by truth, by presence. A teenager stepped forward, phone in hand. Sir, can I ask who you are?" Chuck turned slightly. Their eyes met. The boy froze. Chuck gave the smallest shake of his head. That was answer enough. The boy tucked his phone into his pocket. Some names don't need to be said. They live in moments, not headlines. As Chuck approached a scooter, a boy, 10, maybe 11, was already there, holding Chuck's jacket in both arms. He looked up, wide-eyed. "I kept it clean," he said. Chuck took it, nodded, began to slide it over his shoulders. The boy didn't move. He stood there, his chest puffed with something new, not just admiration, aspiration. Chuck looked down at him just for a second, then gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You saw it all?" Chuck asked. The boy nodded. Chuck leaned down. Chuck leaned down. "I remember this. Strength isn't how hard you hit. It's how long you can stand when no one else will." The boy nodded again, slower this time. It meant more now. Chuck turned and began walking down the street, alone. No one followed. No one asked for autographs. No one begged for a name, because they understood. Whatever had just happened here didn't belong on a trending tab. It belonged to the pavement, to the dust still swirling, to the silence he left behind. The black belt thug still lay in a crumpled heap against the steel gate. No one went to help him. Not out of cruelty, but because even mercy must be earned. Chuck disappeared at the far end of the block, boots thudding softly, and long after he turned the corner and vanished from sight, the street stood still, not in fear, but in reverence. The world doesn't need more men who shout. It needs more who stand quietly when it matters most.